I keep running into scientists who say Genesis teaches scientific nonsense. And I say, well, Galileo said the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to get the wrong point of view.
So this astrophysicist gives amazing evidence for Christianity. So let's get right into it. Shout out to Hugh Ross and Glenn Beck.
Discovered that they didn't have the correct concepts of the universe or space and time. And I went to a high school that was filled with refugees from all over the world. Look, this is the U.S. government. You can't use the word God here. And I said, I don't see that in the Constitution.
Yeah.
But I said, how about this? How about if I talk about the causal agent beyond space and time?
Correct.
That created the universe and designed it for human beings.
Right.
He said, yeah, you can do that.
Well, it's true, because his first question was, do you believe in the Big Bang? And I said, I think so. And he said, does that disagree with God or help prove God? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I was a teenager. I'm not sure. And he said, what was it before and what lit the match?
Yes. And so I started looking in the great philosophers, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I looked at René Descartes, discovered that they didn't have the correct concepts of the universe or space and time. And I went to a high school that was filled with refugees from all over the world. And so they were saying, hey, you need to read these books, Hindu Vedas, the Quran, the Buddhist commentaries. So I began to go through them. And when I read the Vedas, I says, oh, this is where the oscillating universe model comes from. You know, Hinduism is based on reincarnation, that the universe reincarnates. But I knew that their time scale was incorrect. They said you get a new birth every 4.32 billion years, and that number clearly was wrong. I also realized the universe had way too high of an entropy measure to allow for any kind of restart. And the Buddhists said essentially the same thing. When I looked at the Quran, it says there's 3 accounts of creation, but they contradict one another. One of them claiming that the planets are more distant than the stars. You don't need a telescope to realize that's incorrect. Now, I didn't meet Christians or get to know them until I showed up at Caltech to do postdoctoral research. But I did see 2 Christians from 30 feet away when I was 11 years old. These were 2 businessmen that came into our public school and made available Gideon Bibles. This is the Gideon Bible that I started reading at age 17. So the cover's gone because our dog chewed it off. But I started reading that Gideon Bible at age 17. And that was also the same time that physicists in South Africa and Britain were developing the first of the space-time theorems, which basically prove that space and time have a beginning. Space and time are created. And what I notice about the Bible is that it stood alone in making the claim that space and time are created entities. What I saw in the Eastern religions, space and time are eternal, and God or gods create within space and time that always exists. So seeing that the Bible said something different that was being affirmed by the space-time theorems, said maybe this book really is from the one who created the universe.
So can you take me through Genesis and the creation and show me the science?
Well, I was taught the scientific method in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. We got it all 12 years. And so when I picked up this book, the Bible, I looked at the first page, Genesis 1. I said, this perfectly follows the scientific method. It took me 9 years to discover why it so perfectly followed the scientific method.
Right.
That's where it comes from. It comes from the creation texts in the Bible and Reformation theology. But I looked at, Genesis 1:2. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. And it gives you 4 initial conditions. It's dark everywhere on the surface, the water is everywhere, and the planet, Earth, is unfit for life and empty of life. Well, steps 1 and 2 of the scientific method are, do not interpret until you establish the frame of reference. The point of view is the surface of Earth's waters. And don't interpret to also establish the starting conditions. Well, that's all laid out in Genesis 1:2. And I keep running into scientists who say Genesis teaches scientific nonsense. And I say, well, Galileo said the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to get the wrong point of view. And when they say it's scientific nonsense, they think God is above the earth, looking down on the earth and telling us what he did. Instead, it's God on the surface of the earth, looking up at the clouds and telling us what he did. Makes a huge difference in how you interpret the 6 days of creation.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, nobody was helping me on this. I just saw this in the text and said, okay.
At 18.
17.
17.
Yeah. So,
Okay, but also, in my opinion, the Bible is not a textbook, though. It's not a scientific database that we can go to where it has formulas. And that's okay. That's totally fine. That's not what the Bible is for. The Bible is for us, how we can hear from God, how God wants to speak to us, and how he reveals who he is by sending his son Jesus to die on the cross for our sins.
so I said, okay, creation day 1, let there be light. And I said, well, that's when the atmosphere goes from opaque to translucent. I knew enough about astronomy to realize Earth had to begin with an atmosphere 200 times thicker than it has today. An atmosphere that thick will not let any visible light through. The sun and stars existed, but there was no light on the surface of the waters of planet Earth. Day 1 is when the atmosphere was thinned out sufficiently that light could come through. And it says the Spirit of God was brooding over the surface of the waters. That implies the origin of life. So I saw life being originated at the beginning of creation day 1. And then you go into creation day 2, water above and water below. I really didn't have an idea what that meant. But when I got to the book of Job, it devotes 1.5 chapters to creation day 2 and basically describes it as God cycling water in the atmosphere above to the streams and lakes and oceans below and then back again.
Oh, my gosh.
And actually describes 6 distinct forms of precipitation in Job 37 and 38. It mentions, for example, that there will be dew and mist and rain, and then snow and frost and hail. And again, I had enough science under my belt to realize that's the only way you can have billions of people living on the surface of the earth, because the Earth's water cycle is designed to ensure no matter where you are, there's both frozen forms of precipitation and liquid forms, so we can have rivers and streams that flow all years round, and we have abundant food that can be grown everywhere. You need all 6 to make that possible. Then you get into creation day 3, and this is when land masses show up for the first time, when God transforms the earth from a water world to one with continents and oceans. And at 19, I got to take a course on plate tectonics. As far as I know, it was the first course in the world that was taught on plate tectonics at a university. That's because 2 of the 3 physicists who launched the discipline were at the University of British Columbia. Somehow I managed to get into that class as an undergraduate, and that's when they said, oh, the continents haven't always been here. It's plate tectonics that builds up the continents. And they thought it was a linear relationship from 0 to where it is today. Today we know that it takes deep oxygen cycle events to really accelerate the growth of the continental land masses. And so in 2018, they basically showed, for about the first billion years, you got nothing but water, and then plate tectonics kicks in. But at the first great oxygenation event 2.5 billion years ago, about 90% of the continental landmass forms.
Wow.
And so basically it shows that the more we learn about the past history of the earth, the tighter and tighter fit we get with what the Bible taught about these land masses thousands of years ago. And then it talks about vegetation on the land masses. And I've debated the executive director of the Skeptic Society 4 times in university campuses. He always jumped on Genesis no matter what we were talking about, and because he saw that as the Achilles heel of the Christian faith. So he would always say, well, the fossil record shows us we got animals before we got vegetation on the continents. I said, well, obviously, animals have skeletons and shells. That's going to be easily preserved. That's not the case for vegetation. It's going to decay. Right. But what happened in 2009 and 2011, 2 papers were published in Nature saying we now have the isotope evidence, and in 2011, the fossil evidence that vegetation was abundant on the continental land masses 600 million years before the first animals show up. So again, it shows, hey, as we learn more, it basically gives you a tighter and tighter fit.
What would they have eaten if there was?
Seems like every scientist or atheist says, you see Genesis, we got you. I don't think, like he's saying right there, it's actually more evidence for a creator. Every day, I think scientists are finding more and more evidence that is proving that the Bible is not that crazy, and there's more evidence for God.
No vegetation if there was no...
Well, I think Michael Shermer was saying, yeah, there would have been vegetation in the oceans, but the biblical text says vegetation on the land masses. He said we have no fossil evidence of that. Well, we didn't during my first debate, but we do now. We do have that evidence. And then Creation Day 4 is when creatures on the surface of the earth for the first time can see the sun, moon, and stars. And we now know the second great oxygenation event turned Earth's atmosphere from a dense haze to transparent. It's oxygen that determines how transparent the atmosphere is. And so an experiment was done where they took the atmosphere of the Earth, started with less than 1% oxygen and pushed it up. Well, the second great oxygenation event, the oxygen level suddenly goes from 2% to 8% for the first time in Earth's history. That's enough to make the atmosphere transparent.
Unbelievable.
That's exactly the same time that the first animals appear.
Wow.
Animals can't function if they don't know where the sun, moon, and stars are in the sky. They need a transparent sky. But what we see in the fossil record, the very moment oxygen hit that minimum level for animals, animals suddenly appear. You go from nothing but microbial life to animals as big as 2 meters across. And then in Creation Day 5, you also have God creating the sea mammals and the birds. Only the second time it uses the word create. The word create in Hebrew, bara, is for something brand new at God's hand. And what was brand new was animals that are not just physical, but soulish, in that they have mind, will, and emotions, a capacity to form relationships with one another, their offspring. They sacrifice for the offspring. They also are endowed with a capacity to form relationships with a higher species, namely us human beings, and to serve and please us. Then you get into Creation Day 6. It doesn't talk about the first land mammals. It talks about the 3 categories of land mammals that are essential for launching human civilization. And Job 38 and 39 goes into that in great detail. And it's the short-legged land mammals, the rodents that we need for the clothing that humans were critically dependent upon when they first appeared. Because we humans, unlike the Neanderthals, are not adapted for a cold climate. We're fine in a warm climate, but not a cold climate. The rodents enabled us to go into cold climate zones. Then 2 different kinds of long-legged land mammals, those that are easy to tame, the herbivores we use for agriculture, those that are difficult to tame, the carnivores that we use for household companions. And last of all, God creates human beings, and only the third time does it use the word create. Because what's brand new about us, we're not just physical and soulish, we're spiritual. As these birds and mammals were designed to relate to a higher species, we are designed to relate to a higher being, the one that created everything.
Wow.
First of all, that's the best.
That was an amazing breakdown of Genesis and how it can actually apply to science in a way. Muppet says, even the size of the Earth gives us the perfect gravity to work correctly with everything, not to mention the correct distance from the sun. Way too many coincidences. I agree.
Explanation of Genesis I've ever heard. I love that. Let me go back. Where would the dinosaurs come in?
Well, the Bible is written for all generations, so it avoids vocabulary that only modern generations would understand.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mention dinosaurs because they weren't discovered until the 1850s. It doesn't mention protons or neutrinos either.
But it doesn't mean that they didn't exist.
They would have fit in the middle of Creation Day 5, and where you see them implied is Psalm 104, the longest of the creation psalms. And Psalm 104's theme is that God is packing our planet with as much life as possible and as diverse as possible. And so when our planet has conditions suitable for dinosaurs, he creates the dinosaurs. They're not suitable now because we don't have shallow seas to provide the water buoyancy that these huge creatures need. But when the continental land masses were filled with vast shallow seas, there you got the water buoyancy to make possible animals as big as T-Rex and Brontosaurus. I mean, I laughed at the Jurassic Park movies because it shows this T-Rex on land chasing a Jeep at 45 miles an hour.
It wouldn't have happened.
The T-Rex would have injured itself. One little trip and it's gone.
It has no hands to do this.
Well, the biggest land...
Wow, that's super interesting. So he's saying that there's not enough water, bodies of sea for them to survive. But I know the Bible does have some descriptions of dinosaur-like creatures that somehow they knew about. Like, how did they know about that? Right. How would they know about that, though? So maybe some people have seen and encountered dinosaur-type mammals.
Animal you can have without water support is an elephant. Anything bigger than an elephant is going to injure itself because of the law of gravity. It's the same law you see in the NBA. The really tall basketball players, when they trip and fall, they do themselves a lot more injury than someone who's only 5 feet tall. You know, gravity always wins. So
I've never seen that even portrayed with dinosaurs, that they're always around water.
Well, the ones that are weighing 80 tons, they need water buoyancy to support their huge body mass. T-Rex was probably, I mean, it was long-legged. T-Rex was probably swimming around in shallow seas and preying on, huge herbivores. I mean,
Wow.
With those giant jaws, it wasn't eating small creatures like
Yeah,
lawyers.
right.
It was eating something bigger than a lawyer.
So the other thing, and I want to say this because there's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, that's not the field of science. Don't take this as fact. Yeah, I understand that a lot of this is, there's some things that you can never know for a fact. This is verses that Mr. Split is saying here that I know that has pretty references to dinosaurs that would seem like a dinosaur. Job 40:17 says, its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are close knit. Who has a tail like a massive tree? Sounds like a dinosaur. How did they have these descriptions if they haven't seen them?
That have different views of creation and everything else.
Sure.
I personally don't think how God created the universe is essential to my salvation. So, and I don't
100%.
know.
Like,
you don't
let's
know,
be real.
but we're
That's who creates that's essential.
yes,
Right.
right.
Yeah, that's the
When
big
and how,
difference.
Right.
that's less important.
Because I have some friends who claim, no, the Earth is only 5,000 or 10,000 years old, and you're like, dude, that doesn't. I mean, no. Why couldn't God's creation happen? I don't want to say in an evolution. Well, you say it's a progressive creationism, right?
Well, I claim that God performs creation miracles. I mean, he uses the word bara and asa in the Hebrew. That means that God is supernaturally intervening. Sometimes it uses the word haya, which means that it could be through natural process. So it's not either or, it's both and.
Right.
So, but it is over a significant passage of time. In fact, just reading the Bible on my own at age 17, I immediately recognized these days have to.
They act like they know for a fact that is religion, that it's 6,000 years old or whatever. You literally can't, if you want to take the Bible literally, you can't say that's for a fact that it's 6,000 years old because it's not in the Bible. You guys use genealogy to be able to track all the way back, and then that's what you come down to, where the Bible is written to think that's where they have 6,000 years old or whatever. But you can't say that's religion, though. You can't say that's 100% fact. It could. I'm not saying it can't be. I mean, I'm not ruling that out. I don't think it's bad to think that way, but I think it's important to know, God can do whatever he wants.
To be long time periods.
Sure.
For the simple reason that you see the word day being used with 3 different definitions. Creation day 1, it uses the word day for the daylight hours. Creation day 4, it's contrasting seasons, days, and years. That's day is 24 hours. But Genesis 2:4 uses the same word day for the entirety of creation history.
Right. Like Mr. Split says, 2 Peter 2:8 says, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day." Like, how do you know he's not using that as a day for you guys?
The other thing I noted is that the first 6 days end with an evening-morning phrase. Evening was, morning was, day X, which told me each day has a definite start time and a definite end time. You get to day 7, there's no evening-morning phrase, implying we're still in God's seventh day. And both Psalm 95 and Hebrews 4
Wow.
explicitly declare we're still in God's seventh day. And for me, at age 17, it answered the fossil record enigma. For some reason, my parents thought I was being obsessive about physics and astronomy. I didn't know why, but they were worried.
Did you kiss a lot of girls at all?
No.
What a surprise.
I mean, I was saving up pop
Yeah.
bottles and cashing them in to build a telescope.
That's amazing.
I began doing research on T-Tari stars, see science fair and winning the fair. So I was a real nerd growing
Yeah.
up. I really enjoyed my astronomical research, but my family was worried that I was being too narrowly focused. When I was 11, my parents bought us a big, thick book on evolutionary biology. I was the only one in the family that read it. But I remember telling my parents, the numbers don't work. You have all these new families and orders and classes and phyla showing up before humanity, and none of that happens after humanity. They said, go ask your science teachers. They had no clue. They told me to talk to the professors I knew. And I didn't get an answer for them either. But the first time I picked up the Bible, read Genesis 1, I said, this answers the fossil record enigma. For 6 days God creates. On the seventh day, he ceases from his work of creation to focus on his work of redemption. And I also realized that's the principle of the Sabbath. For 6 days we work. On the seventh day, we focus on the most important issues of life. And as I read through the creation text, I was surprised to discover God begins his works of redemption before he creates anything at all, which implies everything that God creates is for the purpose of redemption, and it made sense of the seventh day when God stops creating and redeems. It also explained to me why so many astronomers believe in God and so few field biologists believe in God. Their research is on different days of creation. In astronomy, our data comes from the past because it takes light time to reach our telescopes. The field biologists are doing their research in the present era. So the field biologists say, we see no evidence for the miraculous handiwork of God. Well, they're looking on the wrong day.
Wow.
Day 7, God stops at. But before humanity, you got the 6 days when God
Where do you say he tips his hand that he is worried about salvation or redemption before he creates?
Well, you got passages like 2 Timothy 1:9. The grace of God that we now experience was put into effect before the beginning of time. Or Titus 1:2. The hope that we share in Jesus Christ was granted to us before the beginning of time. Then you got Hebrews 11:3. The universe that we can detect did not come from that which we can detect. We can detect matter, energy, space, and time. So, and that's unique to the Bible. You won't find that in the other holy books. So I says, this book gets all the cosmology right. I mean, what astounded me in going through the creation text not only talks about a space-time beginning, it talks about how the universe expands from that space-time beginning, the stretching out of the heavens, how it happens under laws of physics that never change. And Ecclesiastes and Romans speak about one of those laws as a pervasive law of decay. And hey, if you know high school physics, that implies that the universe gets colder and colder in a highly predictable way. And astronomers have actually got measurements of the past temperature of the universe, and they perfectly fit what the Bible predicted thousands of years ago.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so it gets all the science right. It predicts future science.
Can you?
So he's saying that the Bible is predicting all of this science and future science, and obviously it's not. Science is not debunking the Bible. Flies may believe they live for decades.
Me out with something because I've said this, and don't do what you do. So probably very ineloquently. But I've said this to people who believe in evolution. Everything in our world decays.
Yes.
It becomes more chaotic.
Right.
Nothing in our world starts as chaos and ends up like this. There's no example, is there?
Well, my colleague Fazal Rana, who's our staff biochemist, and I, we regularly attend Origin of Life research conferences. And it's interesting. Each successive meeting is more depressing than the previous meeting because they keep running into these intractable roadblocks. However, I think what motivates them, they do these experiments in the lab and say, hey, we're able to put some amino acids together and get a short sequence of amino acids. Maybe we're on the way to making a real protein, or they're able to come up with some way to make RNA. The problem is it takes a highly skilled team of biochemists, well-funded, with real technical equipment where they make sure we're going to ensure that there is no contaminant chemicals that would degrade the reaction. So they're using pure samples. And there's one...
that would imply that there's a creator.
It implies you need something smarter,
Yes.
more intelligent, more knowledgeable, and better funded than those biochemists to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
But they think they're making progress. And I say, yes, what you're doing in the lab is remarkable. But notice, it's only the baby steps. You can't solve the fundamental problems like how do you get all the amino acids left-handed? How do you get all the ribose sugars right-handed? That's an easy thing, that there is no naturalistic process that does that. And so, if you go to these conferences, they admit that their naturalistic explanations don't work. None of them work. Well, that would imply that there's someone, again, more intelligent than us that did it in the first place.
There's a creator, guys. Come on. Let's be real. Let's be honest. God is good, and he designed us perfectly. So I also, guys, just really encourage you guys to go to God. Know that he loves you, and he's longing to have a relationship with you. So yeah, guys, in the description below, you'll be able to click the link to help you decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that. It will be the best decision of your entire life.